Everybody hates recruiters, and listen, I totally get it. After all, they're the initial gatekeeper for a job that you might apply to. Nobody likes being rejected, and it's easy to lash out and say the recruiter doesn't know what the heck they're doing. But in this video, I'm going to dispel some myths and share with you the ugly truth about recruiters. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to talk about the ugly truth about recruiters. Now, as a corporate recruiter with over 20 years of experience interviewing and hiring thousands of people into some of the world's largest and most well-known companies, I do know a thing or two about recruiters and how we operate. In fact, I created this channel for you, the job seeker, to get an insider's edge and understand how recruiters think. Because if you know how recruiters think, it's going to give you a better chance of making it all the way through the interview process and ultimately to land that offer. But there are a lot of misconceptions about recruiting, and in today's video, I want to dispel some of those myths or potentially confirm some of them. But before we get too far into it, if you're interested in more career-related content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You might also want to hit that notification bell so you don't miss future posts. Okay, so here's the first truth. Recruiters come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them are really good, some of them not so good, some of them really know their stuff, and others don't know a single thing about the jobs they're recruiting for. I think it's important to differentiate between the two major types of recruiters that you might encounter in your job search. The first one being an internal corporate recruiter. They don't get paid a commission, they get paid a salary, and they're usually part of an HR department or a talent acquisition group. And these people are usually very integrated or close to the hiring managers that they support. On the flip side, there's the agency recruiter. The agency recruiter is a third party who makes their living placing candidates into other companies. So essentially, a company will pay a headhunter a percentage of the person's first year's salary if they're a successful hire. And unfortunately, a lot of the bad rap from recruiters comes from third-party agencies. No offense to my agency friends. Now, of course, this isn't a blanket statement because I've worked with some really excellent third-party recruiters and headhunters, but in general, when you're dealing with a third party, they're not as well aligned to the business. They don't have that vested interest the way an internal corporate recruiter would have, and they generally don't have as much sway or pull. They may be working on a lot of different jobs for a lot of different companies, and they may not make you a priority. And in some cases, lower quality agencies will send their positions offshore to a team of recruiters that then tends to spam people. And I know a lot of people have complained about this. I've actually experienced the same thing myself, so I know exactly the kind of experience that provides, which is not a great one. In addition to that, and especially with the bigger houses, these agencies will tend to hire entry-level people to fill a lot of their recruiting positions. So inevitably, you're going to be working with people that just don't have a lot of experience in the corporate world and therefore probably don't know a whole lot about the positions that they're going to be recruiting for. And this leads us right to our second truth, is that an agency recruiter gets paid based on placing you. And what that means is that they only get a paycheck if they place you into an organization and you accept the offer. And there are some unscrupulous agency recruiters who may push you into a role that's not the best fit for you because they want to save their commission. Because you got to remember, it's a cutthroat world, and essentially an agency recruiter is a sales position. So if they're not making their numbers, they're not going to stay in their role very long, and they're probably not going to eat well that month. So if you're working with a third-party agency or headhunter, find one that doesn't make you feel like you're pressured into accepting a job that's not in your best interest, because that's a sign of a good agency recruiter. The next major truth is that experienced internal corporate recruiters are generally pretty solid. And this is especially true if they have a specialization. For example, they work as a sales recruiter or potentially a tech recruiter. Because those experienced and specialized in-house recruiters generally have a very high understanding of the types of positions that they're recruiting for. They've usually done it for a long period of time, and in a lot of cases, they actually did that work in a previous life. For example, some of the best tech recruiters that I've worked with actually were coders in a previous life. And so they know and speak that language, no pun intended. Now, taking that a step further, a good corporate recruiter is going to know when you're lying. So if you put a bunch of fluff on your resume that's not accurate, or you get into an interview and you start winging it and making stuff up as you go, a good corporate recruiter is going to be able to sniff that out really quickly and put you into the no pile. So you're not going to be able to BS somebody that is an expert in this type of work. That being said, if you find somebody that's not that knowledgeable, you might be able to pull a fast one over on them. But I would venture to say that you'll probably be exposed at some point in that interview process. And even if you do lie and get all the way to the offer, you're probably going to end up in a role that you're not a great fit for or weren't really qualified for to begin with, and you're just setting yourself up to fail. An internal corporate recruiter is the gatekeeper. They're going to be the first ones that see your resume, and you have to impress them. Because if you don't get past that first round interview, the hiring manager is never going to know that you even applied or exist. So if you're interviewing for a job that you're really interested in and you're talking to an internal corporate recruiter, don't take it lightly or treat them dismissively, because I've personally been in some interviews where it felt like the person I was interviewing was very disrespectful. And obviously they never made it on to the next round of the interviewing process to talk to a hiring manager and see if they're a good fit. Which leads me to the next truth is when you apply for a job, a corporate recruiter is going to look at your resume. Now, the only time this might not be true is if you're rejected based on a pre-screening question, and these are generally around work eligibility statuses and maybe location. But otherwise, I can almost guarantee that a recruiter is screening your resume directly. Most ATS systems are not automatically set up to reject people. A recruiter actually has to go in and review your profile, and then they will hit the reject button if they feel you're not a good fit. And that's why having a custom designed resume is crucially important, because here's the next truth. A recruiter who is reviewing your resume is only going to give you a 5-second glance. So when you apply to the position, the recruiter is going to go and look at your application and scan from top to bottom in 5 seconds to see if you meet the minimum requirements for the position. If you don't meet the requirements, you go into the no pile, and it is unfortunately that fast. So it's crucially important that you know how to write a very well optimized resume, because if you're applying to jobs and assuming that you're a reasonably good fit for those roles that you're applying for, and you're getting a lot of rejections, it's almost always a resume issue. So if you're getting a lot of rejections and you don't know how to write a good resume, check out my course, Resume Rocketfuel. It's designed by a recruiter to help get you past the recruiter phone screen and into the first round interview. The next major truth is that the recruiter does not make the ultimate hiring decision. The hiring manager does, or potentially the hiring committee who might be involved in the interviewing process. Generally speaking, the recruiter is going to have a voice in that decision, but the majority of that decision is made by the hiring team and specifically the hiring manager who holds the most weight. So if you get rejected at the first screening interview with the recruiter, then you probably weren't a good fit for the position based on what the hiring manager was looking for. It's nothing personal. It's just that they're looking for a very specific profile, and they know what profiles the hiring manager is going to realistically consider and get through the interview process. But if you make it deeper into the interview process and you make it into the interview panel, that decision on whether or not you're going to move forward is 100% the hiring manager's decision. Now, circling back is that the recruiter wants you to do well in your interview. Recruiters are evaluated on their metrics or their KPIs, and one of the metrics is the time to fill. So the time that the job was open to the time that it was actually closed. And if they get a good person in that seat, it gives them goodwill with that hiring manager who feels good about the recruiting situation and has a high degree of confidence that that recruiter is going to be able to find other candidates in the future that are going to be a good fit for the business. So ultimately, that recruiter wants to see you succeed. I do feel like there's a misconception that people feel that the internal corporate recruiter gets some satisfaction from you bombing out of your interview, and that's simply not the case at all. Because if you do well in an interview and you land that offer, I can start to focus on the other positions that I've got on my plate and try to get my time to fill down for those as well. That leads us to the next major truth is that I've never met a corporate recruiter who likes to reject people. It's simply part of the job. And listen, it is not fun, especially for somebody that you know put a lot of effort and energy into it. We do root for certain candidates that we feel we had a really good interaction with. And if they make it deep into an interview process and they get rejected, we're just as bummed out as you are. But ultimately, it's a business decision. Unfortunately, for this particular job, you weren't a good fit, but there's lots of other ones and you'll find something. But rest assured, we don't like delivering the bad news and we don't like sending that rejection letter. Which leads me to the next ugly truth, which is that recruiters unfortunately do sometimes ghost people, and it's usually not intentional. It could be that the recruiter's unorganized and forgot to reject you, which is not a great excuse, or they just don't have good business processes and that stuff isn't automated. But I did make another video about why people get ghosted, and I'll leave a link for that, and it's worth you checking out if you're experiencing ghosting yourself. And keeping to this theme, because the recruiter does want you to be successful in your interview, most recruiters will be happy to help you with interview prep. You just simply have to ask. Now, of course, they're not going to give you the answers for the questions that you might be asked, but they're happy to give you much more insight than you might think about what the hiring hiring teams will be assessing you on, and maybe some helpful advice on how you can best position yourself to stand out from the crowd. Because again, if I can get you into that seat, my hiring manager's happy, their division is happy, my manager's happy, and I'm happy that I can move on to a new role. And if the recruiter declines to give you any assistance, shame on them. They're not a very candidate-focused recruiter. And now the next major ugly truth is that recruiters do not control compensation. However, they do have some influence over it. So in the first round of the interview, I'm going to ask you about your compensation expectations to set the stage. And if you refuse to answer this question, you're probably not going to get moved to the next round of the interviewing process. And I have other videos on how to answer the salary expectation question, so I'm not going to get into it in today's video. However, just know that you should be prepared to answer this question very early into your interview process so that you don't waste anybody's time. But once you make it through all the rounds of interviewing and you end up at the offer, we will have some say in what the compensation should be. In other words, some influence. We'll give some guidance on what we think it's going to take in order to get you. But usually those terms of the offer are made by the hiring manager and potentially HR. And then the recruiter is stuck going back to you with whatever terms they come up with. Hopefully it's advantageous for you. Which leads us to the final ugly truth is that no recruiter enjoys a lowball offer. And generally what happens in a lowball offer situation is that they will present a candidate that's at a certain wage range and they will tell them what the expectation is. The hiring manager will then come back with a much lower than expected salary based on some criteria, maybe that they discovered throughout the interviewing process. And they request that we make the offer at a much lower rate. The recruiter then has to go back to the candidate and give the unfortunate news, knowing full well that it's going to disappoint you and it's not the way we wanted this to end. So like I said, we don't enjoy doing it, but unfortunately it happens. And if you're dealing with a lowball offer, you're probably not wanting to work at that company anyways, and potentially you dodged a bullet. Okay, so those are some of the ugly truths that I wanted to dispel about recruiting. And it's more focused on corporate recruiters because that's what I do. But if you're working with a corporate recruiter or an external agency, there are some really good ones. So if you can find a good recruiter to help you in your job search, it's absolutely worth spending the time to do that. But ultimately, it's up to you, the job seeker, to be as prepared as possible. And again, we do that through great resumes that are very aligned to the positions that we're applying to, knowing how to sell ourselves once we get into the interviewing process, and ultimately knowing how to negotiate a great offer. If you need more help in your job search, this is actually something that I specialize in. And again, as a corporate recruiter, I have an insider's edge to how departments work and recruit people, so I can give you some perspective that maybe you're not going to get on your own. And I've got a website called alifeafterlayoff.com, which is loaded with recruiter tips and tricks. And I also have some of my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. I talked about Resume Rocketfuel already. I also have the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp, which is essentially a very deep interview training. And if you want to skip the recruiter altogether, check out my course, Unlocking LinkedIn, which teaches you how to unlock the hidden job market and potentially bypass the recruiter and head right into the interview process. Hopefully this video helped dispel some myths about recruiters and demystified some of your job search process.